Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter. Alright, everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast. I'm your host, Zach Bitter, and I want to welcome everyone to this episode of the show. As a way to thank the listeners for helping me grow this podcast over the years, I'm going to continue a raffle option for all of you to have a chance to win a free consultation with me. So it's a 30-minute consultation that I will raffle off once per month. All you have to do to enter is share the episodes that you enjoy on whatever platform you find most interesting. The only thing I ask you to do is, if it's a social media channel, make sure you tag me so I see it and can save that and enter in the raffle. Or if it's somewhere else that you can't tag me at, take a screenshot and send that to me at hpopodcast@gmail.com. You can also enter the raffle by writing a show review on your favorite podcast listening platform. So if you do that, take the screenshot, send it to hpopodcast@gmail.com, and I will enter you in that monthly raffle. Also, I'm excited to announce that I launched a new group coaching option. So to go along with my personalized one-on-one coaching options and my pre-made plans that I have on my website at zachbitter.com, this year I'm starting a group of online endurance runners who want to work with me in a slightly different model. So this model is set up so that whether you're a beginner or advanced, you can join. Whether you're training for something like a 5K or something as far as a 200 plus miler, you are welcome, and this setup will help you reach your goals. The way I have it set up is, if you subscribe, you will have access to my full catalog of training plans, which range from beginner 5K all the way up to advanced 200 plus miles. Along with that plan that you're going to use, you will have access to a weekly group meeting where you can ask questions about training. You can ask about adjustments to the plan to make it more personalized to you. You can engage with the other group members if you want. We'll get you all set up and ready to really personalize that plan to make sure that you're heading in the right direction for your event. Also, you will have access to office hours, where if you have something you want to ask and you want to just hop in and ask a question, you'll be given access to that as well. I will be bringing in guest speakers who have a deep understanding of specific topics and things that we'll use to better your training and recovery process throughout the course of the year, as well as a private forum for all the members to engage with one another, share stories, share training tips, and just house a lot of the information that we'll go over on the daily and weekly basis as you're pursuing your race goals. So if you're interested in checking that out, just head to my website at zachbitter.com, go to the coaching tab. From there, you'll be directed to the team coaching option, and you can sign up for that and get onboarded to join the group. If you're interested in keeping up with what I'm up to, please give me a follow on some of my socials. Follow me on Instagram at ZachBitter, on X, Twitter at ZBitter, and check out the brand new HPO podcast handles, which are just at HPO Podcast on Instagram and X/Twitter. Of course, all this stuff can be found quite easily on my website, which is the main landing page for everything I do at zachbitter.com. Here are some discounts and promos for the HPO sponsors. I have a full breakdown of how I use each of these products at the end of every episode. S Fuels is excited to announce that they're offering 20% off some of their protein options, including their new reformulated vanilla Life Bar and their new French vanilla Revival protein powder options. Head over to sfuelsgolonger.com and enter promo code HPOPRO20 to take advantage of that 20% off. This discount runs through March 31st, so hurry up. John G. Apparel has 10% off with promo code BITTER10. Check out their AFO shorts if you're in the market for a new pair of running or gym shorts. That's johng.com, JANJI.com. Element Electrolytes has a free sample pack with purchase and satisfaction guarantee, meaning if you don't like it, they will give you your money back, no questions asked, and you don't even have to return the box. Go to drinklmnt.com/HPO to get that free sample pack and try out all their flavors with your purchase. Finally, Delta G Ketones has 20% off with BITTER20 promo code, and they also offer free consultations to help you assess how their product would best fit your lifestyles. Head to deltagketones.com. All links, promos, and discounts can be found in the show notes as well as every episode landing page. So we're starting the third block. I should specify I work on 4-week blocks. So you're starting your third block, I believe. So week 9 of training, and we're gonna catch up and see kind of how weeks 1 through 8 went and everything like that with the ultimate goal of the Javelina 100, which is still a ways off, but as I'm sure you're experiencing, it starts coming at you quick once you put it on the calendar and the days start chipping away.
When I switched over to Training Peaks and I put it in there for the first time of showing that it was only 33 weeks away, I was like, huh. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay.
It's like that 52-week goal gets down to 33 pretty quick.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, it's been an unreal journey for sure. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And thankfully, I think for you specifically, like you've seen some what I would consider pretty impressive progress for an 8-week time frame. So I think today's podcast will be a lot of kind of looking at what that is, how you got there, and then go over some questions you have as the kind of newbie to the ultra world. And make sure you're heading in the right direction and continue to see some of the success you've had so far.
Yeah, this is going to be fun.
Yeah. So we're still, the nice thing is like we're talking about it coming up quick, but really from a timeline standpoint, you picked a pretty good, generous timeline as far as preparing for races go. Granted, you're coming into the world sort of without an endurance background, so
yes,
you probably you probably were wise to pick a longer timeline, but still it makes a lot of sense because it gives us time to focus on some of the other things you're chasing along the way before we get into, like what I said before, hit record here, the fun stuff.
Yeah.
And for you so far, it's been a lot of kind of base work, and it's been something where I
don't even know if it's called base work. In the first like 6 months of deciding was like pre-base of just trying to become a normal human being. I was so out of it. I was so like unhealthy. Yeah.
You had a ways to go, I guess. So maybe we can refer listeners to our first episode too, because I know we chatted about some of that. But yeah, you were fairly broken, I would say, coming in and looking to kind of turn things around, and that was Javelina was kind of the targets to put on the calendar to help kind of guide that path. I would imagine, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was a commitment. It was a slow progression to a commitment. It was 3 months of just thinking about trying to do something with my life around getting back into shape. Like I just knew I would be driven by setting a date with something, but I didn't know if that was running, if I should get into mountain biking, if I should get into kayaking, whatever the case may be. And I explained this on the first episode. I was hiking a mountain and I saw 2 like 60-year-old dudes run past me going up the mountain, and it just clicked in my head. I'm like, I want to be those people. And so then I was like, okay, how can I do this? And I thought of the silliest, craziest thing that would be for not consistent with what would be easy for me. I tried to pick the hardest thing for me, and I've never ran long distance before. So even though I was a competitive athlete growing up, everything was football and rugby. Yeah. And so I had never done past 13 miles. I'd never done over a half marathon in my life. And so I said, 100 miles sounds pretty hard. Let's do that.
Yeah, no doubt. I like the motivation side of coaching too. So over the years, I try to kind of collect stories that I find that will be fun ones to share with specific coaching clients when I think they're kind of thinking like you are right now. And the one I have for you is last year at the USAT, I don't think I've told you this, but last year at the USATF 100-mile road championships, they do everything that USATF does. It's got like the overall winners, male, female categories, and they have the age group categories and all that stuff. And, age groups are kind of what they are. You have the bulk of participants are usually in that kind of 20 to 40.
20s,
yeah. And then it sort of tapers off, and there's always this kind of like this narrative of like, oh, if I stick around long enough, eventually I'll beat my competition because they just won't be here anymore.
Yep.
And so they had some participants in the 80+ group last year, and it was 4 of them. So it was like, I was thinking about that. I was like, man, if I'm imagining myself in my 80s, if I'm still running 100-mile ultra marathons, at that point, I'm assuming if I sign up for a race, I'm winning that 80+.
Yeah. And you're getting the gold on the podium for the nation.
Like I'm thinking I'm at least going to be on the podium by finishing. And there's one guy in that group who wasn't going to be on the podium. of the 80 plus division, because we had 4 people there, and it was just funny to look at it because people caught wind of that. It actually was probably one of the bigger stories of that year's event. And like people want to know, like, well, when was their first 100 miler? How did they get into running? What was the story there? And it was just funny to see. I think one of them was like their first 100 miler was Western States in 1971 or something like that. Oh my
gosh, yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, so like when you tell the story about seeing the 60-year-old guys going up the mountain, I think of those 80-plus-year-old guys out there on the loop thinking, I'm going 100 miles today, and still checking that box. So
right. Well, and it's funny that you bring that up too. Is this past weekend, it was my kids. I have 2 girls, and it was their very, very first ever track meet. Mm-hmm. And my wife and I were sitting in the stands, and I'm getting addicted to this. Like I haven't told you yet, but like I'm really enjoying this training. I'm really enjoying the long distance. I never ever thought that I would. Uh-huh. And for some reason, I'm sitting there, and I brought it up with my wife. I was like, I wonder if I should start training and do a 10-year timeline to do the decathlon.
Yeah.
Because it's the same concept of like once you start to reach 55, there's no one doing that type of thing. And the decathlon is like considered the world's greatest athlete as kind of the slogan. I was just like, wonder if I give myself 10 years of training after I do this 100 that I could actually like go somewhere with it. Yeah. And it's just a funny thought process. It's a fun exercise to think about.
I would imagine that event too, as far as events go, in terms of not being able to do them as easily, the further away you get from like a collegiate system or some sort of structured type of thing you're already doing anyway, the decathlon's got to be high. Like, there's just so many, like how many high jump pits, pole vaulting pits, javelins do you have access to as an adult outside of a university system or something like that?
Where you're not trying to fight off the kids during track practice. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So no, that's awesome. And I think like in terms of just overall fitness, like that's got to be the king of them all. You kind of have to be a jack of all trades.
Yeah. It's long, it's short, it's fast, it's, sprinting, it's, chucking stuff, throwing stuff. And, I don't know. We'll see which way the world turns after this. Like I said, I have a feeling that I'm going to get really into this. I mean, I'm not even a part of the culture yet because I am still working on my base, and so I prefer to run alone right now. I haven't experienced those events, but I've done sports medicine for the events, and when I used to own my office. And I love that feel. Now I can only imagine like how good of a feeling that'll be being the athlete in it. And I have a feeling I'll probably get addicted to it, but I'll probably turn it into some sort of like stupid, crazy adventure thing after this, like where I'm going to go 200 miles through a mountain range and like part of it's going to be swimming through the Amazon or some stupid thing like that.
Yeah. That's the side of the sport that's getting more attention this last few years. Is they had like the onset of the 200-mile races, and they did exist, but they just didn't really get a lot of attention. But people like the kind of I hesitate to call it the freak show element, but it is kind of the freak show element of ultra running as a whole is kind of that. But when you get into these like really long ones, it's like people like watching that. They like hearing about it. There's like fun storylines in it, and it's just the I would say like the household person who knows very little to nothing about ultramarathon, or someone who's casually observing the sport of endurance, they sort of follow this trajectory in most cases of like the further you go, the more impressive it gets, versus like the faster you get at a specific discipline, the harder it gets and things like that. So like you have people saying like, oh, I did this 200-mile race, or they're planning this 300-miler in Arizona right now. So it's just getting ratcheted up.
It's just going to keep going. And when we're partially cyborgs later down the road, it's going to be like the 500-mile race.
It almost feels like, we're just like finding ways to destroy our physical being, because in the not too distant future we're gonna have like this is probably a short timeline on how long we have where physical feats at the biological level, or maybe something that we're even doing, who knows, but or the inputs that can help improve that are going to be such that it's not as much of a now you broke yourself down entirely and can't do this anymore type of a scenario. So but I mean, let's jump into just kind of the stuff, because I would say like the part of training you're in right now is the one when I'm working with someone who's kind of got a similar situation as you, it can be kind of the hard sell, I would say, is we have a fairly long timeline. In fact, with your timeline, it could end up being half to more of the actual training is just a primary focus. And by half, I mean like where the primary focus is. You'll always be doing low intensity stuff from day one to the finish due to the nature of the event you're doing. but like we're really doing very little outside of low intensity stuff right now.
Yeah.
And
I like it that way.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah, but it is one of those things where it kind of feels like it's just rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. So
I haven't had any boredom yet.
You're still getting excited about it? That's good.
I'm still getting excited. I'm choosing different routes and things of that nature. To me, it's a new journey every time so far.
Yeah.
So I've been happy with that.
Yeah, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this because I think like for you, you're seeing very big, kind of quick progress, right?
Yes.
So I find like when you have the boring input, it becomes infinitely more motivating when there is something that's moving that you can track that is like, oh, this is working versus I've been doing this for 3 months. None of these data points are changing.
Yep.
What am I doing wrong? It just gets frustrating and kind of incentivizes that, okay, I'm just going to give up because this is worthless type of a mentality.
Yep.
You've had anything but that so far. So
Right. Well, and I'll bring the user or the listeners back on my journey. Is this did start technically before October of last year. Is that last time this year, actually a year ago, is when I had my triglycerides went up to almost 700. My eyes got foggy, and I went in and I was experiencing basically a type of pancreatitis that I should have been hospitalized. And I started immediately making some changes then, and that's when I started a walking program.
Yeah.
And I just started walking for 3 months, and there's no change in your health when that happens. Like, you don't feel it. It gets boring very quickly. But thankfully, like, I'm a person, I love audiobooks, and I love listening to things. So to me, I always journey into another space while I'm doing it, and I like dream and all of those sorts of things. It's like a form of meditation for me. But yeah, there was no progress for like 3 months other than the fact that instead of severe pain with walking 20 minutes, I could walk an hour, you know, and that was my progress. And then October, when I declared, my back was still going out. I still had just tons and tons of health issues, but I started making that progress I went from like being able to do 2 minutes of running to maybe 4 minutes of running. And I could start to feel that compounding effect through those 3 months up until December. And then when you and I started like really actually planning and getting my base and doing actual base training, it was like every single day I felt like I was making progress. But had I not done the 6 to 9 months before that of not making much progress, I wouldn't have been ready for the January. And the January is when I switched over. And so for those listening, I lost 25 pounds in 30 days, and it's one of those. I massively increased the running. I switched over to the modified carnivore diet, and I wouldn't have been able to have done all of that had I not done the prep work. So it makes it feel like I amplified really quickly. But it was a long journey to get there. And I want to make sure that people don't think that this was like an overnight success. But,
you weren't in a coma and woke up and just started running all of a sudden.
Exactly. But the transformation has been phenomenal. So overall, since Christmas, I've lost 30 pounds overall. My cholesterol's gone from 300 down to 90. My triglycerides went from that, I think it was like 677, down to like 70. Like, it's just been this massive shift in all of my biomarkers. My body fat percentage went from 31% down to now like 24% already. I've been gaining lean tissue, you know, so I've been gaining muscle mass while doing it as well, because I'm hitting the gym like a power lifter three times a week. And so all of these transformations happened. They're in an amplified way, but because I did all that work beforehand.
Yeah. I mean, you said a lot of stuff there I think we want to dive into. So let's start with some of the metrics that we've been using to kind of track your progress. I think there's the more standard ones that I'm kind of doing along with you from the coaching side of things, where we are looking at things like how much volume can you tolerate? How much of this run is spent walking versus running? Like, what is the intensity? Or I guess in this case, we're pinning the intensity pretty static for the most part. We're not deviating from it a lot, I guess I could say. But what is changing quite quickly actually is your pace at that. So like your efficiency is improving quite a bit. I think that first session you did, you were like around an 18-minute mile or something
Yep.
like that. And now how fast are you going for that same intensity?
Down in October, back in October, it was definitely, it was hovering between that 17 and a half, 18-minute mile because it was just so much walking. And then now, like 2 weeks ago, I did a 2-hour run, hit 10 miles. I did 11.5-minute average for my pace. And so I think overall I've been averaging right around 12, but just significantly faster. And like, I'm recovering fine, and I'm not even feeling that. Like, it's increasing that much without me having any detrimental effects.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I think it draws, and if this continues, it becomes even more apparent where you see like all sorts of stuff when it comes to exercise and weight loss, and you look at some kind of theories. It's like, oh, exercise really doesn't make that big of a difference. And it's like, well, it doesn't if your input is like 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. And to some degree, I'm not like scoffing at that, because a lot of people, I mean, yourself included, not that long ago, that would have been potentially insurmountable.
Yeah.
So for you to even be able to employ an exercise regimen that would actually be a meaningful mover on weight loss wouldn't have been an option you had available to you.
Right.
So it's like, it's one of those things where it is kind of more like a more of an advanced stage in terms of how it impacts weight loss, to the degree where now your workload, what you're able to tolerate and what you're able to actually do in terms of how much energy you can expend in, say, a given hour at a relatively low intensity has changed drastically.
Yeah.
I mean, if we just look at the numbers, like, you know, in a 60-minute session now, like, you're going to get closer to 5 miles, whereas you were closer to 3.
Yep,
so
exactly.
Yeah, you've almost doubled your workload. I guess it'd be a 50% if we go 18, and you got 50% increase in your workload.
Don't ask me, man.
Yeah. But I mean, you can see where that's going, right? It's like, so from a weight management standpoint, or within your weight loss goals, you've inherited essentially a 50% improvement in what that is going to do for every hour you spend per week exercising. So your ability to do more duration and the amount you're getting per minute or per hour from that has improved. So you're kind of getting this exponential progress from exercise that wasn't available to you before.
Right.
And when we pair that with everything else we're going to talk about, well, I think it'll probably make more sense as to why you've seen the progress you have.
Well, and I love this thought process of it. It's so critical that time-based, you know, like when you and I first talked about that, time-based training versus metric-based training was just so much more powerful for me. And this comes into, I love talking about this as the difference between science of performance versus the science of habit change. And, you know, you were talking about the 30-minute thing. Most people can't go 30 minutes, and so therefore they're not going to be able to make that hour. But it's the transformation has to happen, and that's why in the beginning I was talking so much about the 9 months before getting to the hour, is that you have to do the behavior change science first.
Yeah.
And you have to ignore what's best from a science standpoint of like peak performance and getting that in. You have to get your habit change first. You have to get your everyday being able to tie your shoes and actually get out the door.
Yeah.
And that's the hardest step that most people miss out on, myself included, that I ignored for years about my life. And so to me, like the beginning of this, just doing time-based thought process and ignoring all of the science about like what's best about training is just doing the habit change, to me, was the most important thing. And that's what I focused on. It was getting my shoes on, getting my shorts on, getting out the door, getting that first 5 to 10 minutes in. And then suddenly my brain would be like, okay, I'm doing this. And that's the hardest struggle, is to just get out the damn door when you're first getting started. And then we started to refine. And so that's where we're at now, which I'm excited for. Is up until this month, if you would have told me to do different paces, I don't know if I could have done it. Like,
just
I had one
walk.
pace. I could barely go. That was my one pace. And so now we're finally, after all this time, getting into those types of strategies.
Yeah, that's interesting, because it's you definitely kind of laid the foundation of the routine for months leading in. So then when we just changed the inputs to match what your goals were, it wasn't something that foreign to you. It was just, all right, I have this scaffolding of what my life or my day looks like or my week looks like. now we're just going to put these inputs into what was there before.
It is funny, the Training Peaks comment that I made yesterday when you upped my so my new routine this month is added on a day of training.
Yeah.
And I was like, F me. Like I was so used to my routine of like I had my whole life designed around the 4 days a week of getting my kids to homeschool, getting my kids to, all of that stuff. And now, okay, well, I hadn't had it in my mind like that it was another month and that my plan was going to be changing. And when I saw it, I was like, oh God, I got to switch up my routine again.
Yeah.
So it was not that I was worried about the extra hour of running and doing the things. It was more so like, my days switched and my habits now have to switch. And to me, like that's what I'm so focused on is my habit development.
Okay, we should talk about that actually, because I read that comment a little differently, but this makes sense. So yeah, then this is a great topic because this is something I have a conversation with all my clients at some point, which is let's look at it through the lens of there are different ways to get the same result. So most people I'm working with, pretty much everyone I'm working with are professionals in somewhere other than running. Right. So they have families, they have jobs, they have schedules that they have to kind of work around. They have non-negotiables, right? These are things they can't sacrifice for their running pursuits. So the way I look at it is like when I'm thinking of like, what do we want out of these 4 weeks? I'm thinking, what are the goal intensities and what is the amount of volume we want to spend at those goal intensities? And then how do we maintain the highest amount of quality within that framework? So the way you actually distribute the time spent at those goal intensities can vary a lot. And I usually put the parameters in whatever can maintain the quality is on the table. Because the big change or the big adaptation you're going to get is from just doing that framework. There's maybe some very small variances in terms of like, let's say, rather than having you do like a 45-minute run on Monday and then a 45-minute run on Wednesday, if I took those two 45-minute blocks and put them back-to-back days, you might see some small improvements from putting them closer together, but it's very, very tiny relative to just doing that volume of work at that intensity we have programmed. So for your plan,
to me, it doesn't actually matter, but I like where you're going with this.
Yeah. So when I hear you say, oh, it kind of messed with my schedule, my coaching brain goes, okay, well, maybe we revert this back to a 4-day plan the way we had it before, but we maintain the volume goals that I have on the current 5-day plan. If that's what's going to match your schedule better.
I'd rather do I personally would rather do the 5 days. Yeah.
Oh, you do?
Since we're talking through this in real time. Yeah, no, I'm excited about the transition. In my brain, I had it as next month we were going to be starting the transition because when you and I talked about the 3-month block, for some reason in my head, I was just like, oh, okay, for 3 months, I'm going to be doing 4 days a week at Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday as my routine. And so I'd kind of just, it was, like it was like that quick shock to my brain of like, I'm thankfully in a position because I purposely designed my life the way that I want to. We homeschool our kids. I run my own businesses. Like I can do whatever I want. And that's why I'm doing all of this is like, I can fit it in however I want. So to me, I'm excited about the change. It was just like that culture shock of like, I wake up and I look at Training Peaks and the whole new program is out there and you're like,
So you're on cruise control. Yeah. That's actually another good topic though too in general is the way I look at, and this is why I pick 4 weeks in terms of kind of what I like to kind of showcase for a client is, I mean, there's plenty of like potential moving parts within that 4 weeks, but when I share kind of like a 12-week plan, or I'm sorry, a 12-month or a 6-month or whatever happens to be planned, I look at it as a scaffolding, and then like if the progress suggests us, like the steps are going to be pretty much the same regardless of how much you improve or don't improve to a large degree, but when we kind of do some of these steps can change based on your progress. So with you specifically, like we got to week 8 at probably even maybe a little ahead of where I anticipated you to get by week 12. So one of the reasons why that 4-day to 5-day model shifted 4 weeks in your versus what you were anticipating from what we talked about before you started is because you've made really, really good progress. And it was like, exactly. And the way I look at that is, for one, it's like, you do want to be mindful of getting ahead of yourself in terms of like, you're trying to line up to peak at a specific date. So like if we had a situation where like I'm programming in a way that's aggressive enough that all of a sudden you're peaking in August, and then we're in this weird situation where like we kind of want to just kind of hold that fitness versus like build up to it. That can be, depending on the person, the situation, that's not always ideal. I think for someone who's new though, it gives us more options. So if we're checking things off the list of what you want early, it just gives us more time to play around with other inputs or lean into certain inputs that are still going to be important, or adding more of them can add value. We just maybe don't have time for them if you hit like the standard protocol or our predetermined protocol. So getting ahead at this point, I think, is a really good thing, because what it does is it allows us to kind of reserve more time and space to do things that we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So it opens up a new category of things we can do that will help you get to the finish line quicker at Javelina. And and it also is just a nice buffer too, because it's like, what if you get a little dinged up somewhere along the way and need to take a little time off or do some cross training or something like that.
There's definitely those things where my body is like... Yeah,
there's stuff that happens, It's
not
there's
always a lot of dysfunction in my body that can go wrong.
Or like you were saying before, like what if you throw out your back and you can't run for a week? It's like we have a buffer that we can play around with that. It's not nearly as like compromising in that situation. Then in fact, in your situation, it probably would be, at worst, it would just put us back to like our original timeline versus having some flexibility within it.
Oh, cool. That's good to hear.
Yeah. So
we hadn't had a chance to talk about it.
A+ for Dave.
Ooh, sweet. Awesome. I feel good.
Report cards in after the first 2 months.
Oh, super cool.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of the other stuff you've been tracking too. And I guess maybe before I ask this, I'll just say in general, I think the biggest value of tracking is you're putting yourself in a position to recognize wins that you maybe wouldn't have recognized otherwise. Yeah. So there's a balance that everyone is going to enjoy. I mean, like, I love data. So like just the collecting of data and analyzing it is something that motivates me. I get excited about. Whereas like Nicole, she definitely has that side to her, but she puts so much of that attention into her day job that when it comes to running's more of a like, tell me what to do. Yeah. I've been doing this for over 30 years. So like if you tell me an intensity to run, I know what that intensity feels like, but I don't want that watch to tell me every minute if I'm on pace or off pace. I don't want to have to sit down to a GPX file and analyze it. So like it is different from person to person to some degree, but I think when you're looking for like the stuff that you're looking for, which is kind of a multi-tiered goal in terms of there's the running component, there's a health component, there's a nutrition component. Everything that we talked about in that first episode is like the more stuff you can track, the more access to small wins you can build into this approach.
And it shows are you going in the right direction?
For sure.
Yeah, I totally grew up an intuitive athlete. I was very in tune with my body. I could control my heart rate with my mind. Like I could, and when I was, because I was in wrestling, I was in football, I was in baseball, I was in track. Like I did all the things, right? And I could control my body very, very well. And I had a lot of spatial awareness with doing, foot control, whatever the case may be. I never tracked metrics back then. And just because I was such a naturally gifted athlete at that point for what I was doing, now I've actually found I'm still that intuitive athlete, but having that confirmation of just that quick check of like, I can feel my body and then I'm confirming on the watch reinforces my intuition. And so it's amplified my intuition while I'm running of like feeling my heart rate increase too quick, knowing how to, like, as I visually see an incline coming up, I'm able to prepare my body's heart rate better. Like it's a really cool feeling of what I'm starting to realize by having the data to empower my intuition towards running. And then the perspective data afterwards, like, okay, so I have a Garmin Fenix 6X Pro. So that tracks sleep, fitness. I have this broken down into all the activities of my life according to like my energy bucket thought process. So I have strength training, I have sauna sessions, I have farming time on here because I own a farm and I do farming time. I have walking time, running time, and recovery time. So that's like my stretching, reading a book while I'm stretching, foam rolling, that kind of stuff. And so I break them all down into time frames, and being able to have that access of data where it's all fractionated out, that afterwards I just get to look back and see the trends of what I'm doing is really empowering for me, because I can look back on my 3-month segments and see the different time allocations flipped. I can see the progress made, and it's just super motivating for me. And then on top of that, I'm doing blood work every month. So I'm getting comprehensive blood work, and I'm getting my DEXA scan, which is a body composition scan. And both, mostly the DEXA scan, I feel like the DEXA scan is another accountability coach for me.
Yeah.
Because you can't lie.
Right.
and it tells you so much more about your body fat, and especially around your visceral organs, which is the most important. So like, I actually don't care about my weight, and I care a little about my overall percent body fat. I care most about the body fat around my organs, because that was my main issue of, pre-diabetic and all of the things that normal people 45 years old experience. So I care most about losing the body fat around my visceral organs and around my lower abdomen. Sexual performance and everything like that is increasing, right? Like all of these good things that are going in the right direction. That body scan allows me to see on a monthly basis. Even though it's not necessary to get that scan, I could do it every 3 months or every 6 months. It just is like that monthly check-in to be like the week before. I'm already rethinking like, okay, where am I at? How am I? It's keeping me that accountable that I never thought would. So it's kind of cool that way.
Yeah. The frequency can matter, because it's like something where if you're doing it every 3 months, you could be 3 weeks off of your last one
and track.
And you just like, you had good improvements. So you're like, oh, well, maybe I'll just deviate from the plan a little here and there, treat myself a little more than I normally would. And there's not, there's time and place for that stuff too. But generally speaking, like, if you have the DEXA scan coming up in 5 days, just your mind is probably going to think more like, I need to be on point versus I've got a lot of flexibility to kind of.
It's kept me spot on with the diet. It's kept me spot on with like the motivation to get out and exercise. It's kept me spot on to keeping my bedtime at a regular and consistent time, 7 days a week.
Yeah.
And I was like, I've never been able to do that in my life before. And I think it's because of the power of data that is driving me to keep these habits, because the data doesn't lie. Whereas I could easily lie to myself before, like, oh, I'm fine, or I'll go drinking over the weekend because I know that I can recover quickly, right? Like all of those BS excuses that we all tell ourselves.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and you get a pretty good sign of what happens when you drink versus when you don't, when you look at HRV data and resting heart rate and things like that. So it does kind of let you know, like, that wasn't free.
Right. Yep. Exactly.
Cool. So and I think just generally, like, the lesson that running teaches a lot of times is it creates that sort of foundation for the routine. And then you start recognizing, like, you probably had these habits to some degree through other disciplines in life, but like, generally speaking, like, you take that process and you can plug that into just about anything. Yeah. And it fits.
And they all
really
amplify on each other.
Yeah.
So like, work has improved, relationship has improved with wife and kids, all of those factors, like, you just become more disciplined by doing it.
Yeah, has the family gotten into some of your activities?
They have. Yeah. So both my wife and I have been losing weight like crazy. We're both doing the modified carnivore. And the kids, they've always naturally ate that way, which is kind of fun because we raised them very young to not eat processed foods. So they rarely, like, it actually used to be a treat before we were strict the past 2 months. It used to be a treat. We would actually take them to McDonald's like the once every 2 months. Yeah. And that was like a fun date night, but we would never normally eat that type of food. And so they're used to, like, when I cook these big steaks now, and I typically cook 2 to 3 of them at a time, it's just everyone eats off the cutting board. We kind of had this really cool, like, family dynamic where the meat and everything just gets slopped down into the center of the table, and we all kind of just, and they're still eating their fruits and yogurts and all the good stuff that way, and vegetables. And it's just like, it's become this fun little community time where we sit down together and we talk about our day, we talk about things that we're doing, talk about our passions, and catch up on the day kind of thing. Yeah. So it's become a community hub, but yeah.
Yeah, that has to be pretty powerful to have the family on board too, have kind of a similar, or I suppose their goals are probably quite different, but they're still kind of within the framework of some of those inputs they match. So you can all kind of enjoy the process together and feel like you're all doing something that has a similar kind of target.
Both my kids are getting into athletics and starting to understand. And it's honestly like, we talked about the two guys who passed me on the mountain. I would say the much bigger driving force was that I saw my kids growing up and I was not leading by example for how I thought that their life should be. And to me, that's a real driving force, is like to lead by example for my kids. And so to see them in the transition that they've made without even talking to them about it, they're just naturally doing more stretching. They're naturally getting outside and going for more walks and skateboarding and, doing all the things on the farm that we have. And so it's a daily reminder of why I need to keep doing what I'm doing, which is really, really meaningful.
Yeah, yeah. And you said your kids are in track now?
They are. Yeah.
What are they?
They're 11 and 12, and so we homeschool. So it's a homeschooling track club that we're a part of.
Oh, really?
And it's super, super fun, super cool. A whole bunch of other homeschooling kids, and my older one, so 11 and 12. The 12-year-old is doing shot put, discus, the 100 and the 200, and my younger one is doing the 200, 400. And long jump to start off with.
Awesome.
Yeah, and they're loving it.
A nice spread of different events to watch when you go to these meets.
Mandatory, we were trying to get them into as many things as possible. And basically, my thought process with them, growing up in the sports medicine world of seeing kids get wrecked by specializing too quickly in their sport, it's mandatory for them to do as many events as possible, especially these first 2 years of development. We do not want them specializing, even if we're not focused on winning. What we're focused on is, what do you like? What do you not like? How are you moving your body? What are the routines that you're setting up? And that's how we're training our kids to enjoy the sport for the sport overall, not for winning the gold medal in the 100 kind of thing. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I think one of the more beneficial things that I was exposed to at that age was, my parents kind of had an unwritten rule of we don't care what you do, but you got to be doing something.
Yeah.
So it was every kind of season had its options, and I was I don't have to do any of these, but I need to do something.
Yep.
And that kind of led me to just get curious about, well, I wonder what this is like. Try it for a year. Maybe I love it and keep doing it. Maybe I don't, and I try something different the following year. And then it just exposed me to the variety of sports and different exercises out there that are available. And I learned which ones I was both better at naturally and ones that I enjoyed more. And sometimes there were ones that I enjoyed that I wasn't great at. So I just worked hard and kept doing them anyway for fun. And there was other ones where I was a little more naturally gifted at. And it was okay, this is one where I can maybe express my competitiveness a little more in.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where I look back on, I'm I'm really glad I was exposed to all that stuff, because who knows, maybe I would have never found running had I.
Right.
Or if I did, maybe I would have found it later on in life as well, what's available for adults, and running sometimes pops up early in that scenario.
Such an interesting conversation too, that we have this with our kids, is something like a football. Yes, you can continue on, but it's not likely, right? Running, kayaking, track, field, those are the things that you can do the rest of your life. And so we're not that we're mandatory exclusiveness of things that you can continue on into the real world. But there's definitely a leaning towards that for teaching our kids to get into those types of sports for long term, rather than thinking of, okay, I'm going to go do X, Y, and Z, and it's only good until college kind of thing.
Yeah. So I'm curious, the homeschooling track club, that sounds like such an Austin thing.
Yeah, homeschooling is really big here.
Yeah,
there's so many things that we're in. We're it's crazy overload for us, actually. They're in a national science competition called Science Olympiad. They're in this track club. They do all these sorts of crazy things like that are available for homeschooling kids here. Austin has one of the biggest homeschooling populations, and especially for people who don't want to put their kids in the traditional system, and they don't want to have them go through the Montessori or something like that, because there's still a lot of restrictions with Montessori. Like, it's a pick your poison kind of thing.
Right.
There's advantages and disadvantages to every type of schooling, and here there's just a huge variety of homeschooling. You can find every type of homeschooler here in Austin.
Yeah.
And so we're, track club, there's science, there's STEM, there's arts and crafts, there's math clubs, there's all that stuff we do.
There was a homeschooling method that I hadn't been aware of when I was teaching that I heard about during the pandemic, which was like these pods that they were doing, where it was like, it was more or less, you'd have like a group of families that they had like maybe amongst like 3 or 4 of them, anywhere between like probably 8 to 10 kids or something like that. And they had kind of like a rotation with the parents.
Yep.
Where it was like, this parent has Monday, that one has Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And they sort of they took kind of like the teacher role for that one day per week, and then just worked with that small group. I thought that was a really cool setup, because it was like can lean on the strengths of the parents. Because every parent, they're like anything, right? You could be a jack of all trades and try to teach every subject matter, but at the end of the day, you're probably better at some and worse at others.
And the time requirement too.
Exactly.
Like even teaching, it's just like, you can't teach your kids everything. And even though I'm good at a lot of stuff, I don't have time to as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, pods and co-ops were how we started. Definitely, where you have those rotations, and it's like an actual. Like, I don't want to say actual classroom, but like, here's your hour and we're going to study Greek mythology.
Yeah.
Like that kind of approach to it.
Yeah. Yeah. The biggest miss in traditional education, I think, is like, it's not a miss necessarily. It's just really hard to apply at like a systematic level of like, we're going to take every kid in town and jam them into one building, which is like, how do you take a subject that really has no connection to a specific discipline, but embed that discipline in it? And when you can get that right, it's just so much more rewarding, because then you can start leaning on the things the kids are actually interested in, and building some of the skills you want to teach them inside of something they actually care about, versus opening up the dusty old math book and figuring out how to like work this algebraic equation.
Everything is play-based for us. So the thought process of whatever the kids are into, that's how we try to amplify their learning. And so there's the core skills that when they're young, you have to teach them the reading, math, writing. But above those 3 skills, it's like, right now my daughter, so a while ago, my daughter self-taught her language skills. She learned Japanese with Duolingo. Right. Yeah. And because we set a goal that we would take her to Japan if she became fluent.
Oh, wow.
Well, so like in a year or 2, we're going to go to Japan, because she actually started learning 6 different languages all by herself. We didn't even know that she was doing it. It was something that she was passionate about, that she just got into. And so like, that's the power of homeschooling, is that you can amplify the learnings of all the same stuff, but it's putting it into the framework of what the kid is most excited about at that given time. So now she's into filmmaking. And so we're learning, like, we watch YouTube channels together, and we watch educational content, but then we dissect, like, how did they make that content? What was the production like? How did they write that script? Like, it's so crazy that all of this information is out there.
Yeah.
And that you can teach your kids now all the different fractions, and this is what the real world is going to be like for them by the time that they're working age. They're going to have to constantly learn new things every 2 years. And so this is they're already doing it, which is what we love about homeschooling.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, the school framework it really doesn't incentivize you any longer to get into a routine that stays static for your career, because like you said, that's going to be moving at a fast pace by the time they're looking for jobs and things like that. So the old framework of like, how do we get kids organized enough to go and work their 9 to 5 or whatever it happens to be, it's now like, how do you prepare someone to like just know how to learn?
Right.
And when they get given an assignment, they know what to look for and how to kind of solve the problem.
Yep. So problem solving, determination, and grit. That's what we're really after.
Yeah.
Yeah. Stick with it. Solve the actual problem. Don't give up on it.
Yeah.
Those sorts of things. And whatever that case may be, it's just, you've got to have those founding principles, which is just the same as like what I'm doing with my running, right? I've got to work through my problems. I've got to keep through it and determined, like, I have a goal, And in order to achieve that goal, I can't just give up in January around a few workouts. Like to me, there's this aspect of, especially leading by example with the kids, like I'm not going to miss a workout even if I have some pain. I'm going to modify it, but I'm not going to miss it. And teaching that consistency is really important for me.
Yeah. Yeah, you're doing the same thing they are. You're learning on the fly.
Yep.
Awesome. Here are some discounts and promos for the HPO sponsors. I have a full breakdown of how I use each of these products at the end of every episode. S Fuels has a 15% site-wide discount, and right now are running a free 30-serving pack of their S Fuels Train product with promo code HPO Train. Hurry up on this one, though. They have a limited number of supplies. Go to sfuelsgolonger.com, promo code HPO Train. John G. Apparel has 10% off with promo code BITTER10. Check out their AFO shorts if you're in the market for a new pair of running or gym shorts. That's johng.com, JANJI.com. Element Electrolytes has a free sample pack with purchase and satisfaction guarantee, meaning if you don't like it, they will give you your money back, no questions asked, and you don't even have to return the box. Go to drinklmnt.com/HPO to get that free sample pack and try out all their flavors with your purchase. Finally, Delta G Ketones has 20% off with BITTER20 promo code, and they also offer free consultations to help you assess how their product would best fit your lifestyles. Head to deltagketones.com. All links, promos, and discounts can be found in the show notes as well as every episode landing page. I want to kind of hit on just the nutritional component that you're working on here, which is part of
super fun.
Yeah, part of the success is always going to be in that world. So you picked a modified carnivore diet as the kind of the input that you were going to use for this project. Was there anything specific that led you towards that way?
Yeah. So last year when I first started getting all my health issues, I, again, going back to data, I put a continuous glucose monitor on, and I went through a 2-month process of really learning what works well in my body, what controls my glycemic index, what controls my sugar spikes, all those sorts of things, what gives me better sleep. And the old school meat and potatoes, which is what I grew up on.
Yeah.
And I instinctively knew that worked well. So to me, it was I'm a person, because I've been in health and wellness for 30 years. I've tried every single type of diet you can imagine, other than carnivore style of diet. And so I was like, I want to give this a try. So for me, my modified carnivore, I modified it to my liking, and this is really important that I think a lot of people don't talk about, is that I know that I do really good with dairy and cheese and meat. And so for me, the modified carnivore is I did honey yet, I did maple syrup, I did raw sauerkraut, raw kefir, raw milk, raw cheeses, and then meat. And that was it. And that allowed my metabolism to transition over to keep my energy levels high while my genetics had to make that flip, right? Because we need the materials in our body to have that metabolic flexibility. If we just go into the modified carnivore and we're used to eating crap all the time, then we're in for a really bad crash and headaches and all of the things that people experience. And so for me, I wanted to do this 2 months of modified, and then yesterday I started the true carnivore diet, which is just meat, salt, and water. And so I'm doing that for 30 days. But this allowed me to never be hungry. I was constantly eating, and it sounds counterintuitive because of all the narrative out there in the world of you have to lose weight by cutting calories. Technically, I still was in a calorie deficit, but I was always eating all day long.
Sure.
Sometimes it would be 3 times a day. Sometimes it would be 5-6 times a day where I was eating, because I was chasing my energy levels. I always wanted to feel like I wanted to have energy. And especially to get recovered from the one day and make it to the next. So to me, on my days where I was running, I was eating those 5 to 6 times a day. And the days that I wasn't, I was eating the 3 times. And I was just monitoring it that way, but I never counted calories. I just constantly ate, and I ate a lot of fat. I ate a lot of the cream off of the raw milk, right? Like all of those sorts of things. And it just works well for me. So to me, that was like, I never went to bed hungry. I slept really well, and I was really satisfied with it.
Yeah, I'm always interested in that question because I find it to be something where, like, for long-term success, you sort of need to find something that does what you described, where, yeah, there's an energy deficit or you wouldn't be losing weight, right? But what inputs are going to create an environment where you feel like you can kind of just intuitively do it?
Yeah.
And deviating it actually feels weird versus like trying to stick to it feeling weird. I find like the diets that tend to not work are ones where, like, I mean, you can force yourself to do anything, but if by doing that, it feels like you're constantly making compromises and constantly like fighting that, like what your body wants,
Yep.
it's just usually fails in the long run.
Right.
So it's like eventually you kind of got to get around to finding something where, like, when you start doing it, maybe you're tracking in the early stages or who knows, but intuitively you're kind of more likely to kind of hit what your body needs versus what your desires may lead you to if every option's on the table.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting to hear like what past people find, because I find it to be pretty wide ranging in terms of like what ends up working from one person to the next. But when they find that, they talk exactly like you, where it's like, oh yeah, I feel like I'm eating way more.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm not restricting. But
Energy.
everything's heading in the right direction. So it almost kind of it's kind of like a chicken or an egg thing, right? Where it's like what food is going to get me to my goal versus what food is going to provide me with the satiety and the energy that is going to make the things that will actually drive that goal stuff on the table and able to be done.
Yeah. Yeah. And I found, and touching on that, it's like, I love eating real food. I love eating potatoes. I love eating veggies. I love salads. But I'd stay hungry with that. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize that until I had the counterbalance of when doing the modified carnivore, that I now understand that about myself, that I could eat a big baked potato with a steak and it would make me more hungry than if I just ate the steak and had like a little milk. It's just like so counterintuitive. I would have never guessed that about me.
Uh-huh.
I'm still eating real food. I'm still trying to eat healthy.
Yeah.
But it was still making me hungry. Like those carbs and things just must not be the best for me at this given stage in my life. Now, once I lose another 30 pounds or something by the time the race day comes, that'll probably be a different scenario. My metabolism's going to be completely different, and I'll probably be just fine eating a potato with my steak kind of thing.
Well, you'll get to a point where the goal shifts, where the goal will go from I need to lose weight to the goal means I need to just maintain where I'm at.
Yep.
And when you get there, you're fighting the opposite battle. You maybe I give you a 5-hour long run on Saturday.
Yeah, I know. I'm still thinking about that equation, because even on this 2-hour run that I did 2 weeks ago, I didn't have water with me. I didn't have a gel pack with me. Like I'm still at that very strict stage where I don't need to fuel during my training.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering about this equation of like, okay, how's my body going to handle this in 2 months when I know that I'm going to be out on that 3-4 hour run? Like, am I going to be able to digest my food? Like, I'm excited to get to that stage with you and explore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you'll hit a point where now all of a sudden the thing that would have been problematic becomes a tool where like you need to get a certain amount in to maintain weight versus lose weight. And maybe that potato allows you to eat more and then you bring it back. Yeah. It's just like, it just kind of shines a light on kind of the context of the situation and how much that actually matters and the goals and how they shift along the way.
For me, this 3 months was, I knew I needed to lose a ton of weight in order for the running to improve. Mm-hmm. And so for me, like it was just as much of a priority around eating as it was the running. Mm-hmm. And, I just constantly reminded myself of that. And so it became very easy to follow. Mm-hmm. And not to mention, like, this is the beauty. I can't wait to tell the world about this. Homemade ice cream on the modified carnivore.
Yeah.
Like, because good ice cream is actually just egg yolks and raw milk and a little bit of honey.
Yeah.
And it blows your mind how amazing homemade ice cream is. And it fits within the modified carnivore. So every Sunday we were making our own big bowl of ice cream. Yeah. And just getting that feeling of like having that nice treat and dessert kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's another thing the family can do together and enjoy, right?
Absolutely,
so it's like an activity. That's actually, I would be curious your thoughts on this, like, because your mind probably always is thinking about like, where's the lesson in here? Because you're homeschooling your kids, so you're thinking like, how do I essentially get more efficient by teaching them something while we're doing something we would have been doing otherwise? Yep. I always think of that, like, if I were homeschooling kids or just teaching kids in general, like when I'm really firing all cylinders. It's like, how do I turn everything we're already doing into the lessons where they can do it? So
massive amount of chemistry in making ice cream. Yeah. You really have to understand thermal equation. Like there's, the why do we add salt to things? Well, it lowers the freezing point. And, all these sorts of things, like you can teach the chemistry behind all the molecules and the interactions that they have. And it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So, okay. So modified carnivore, running at low intensities. Tell me about the family farm. That's new, right?
Yeah.
Or have you been doing that for a while now?
That's remember. Been 3 years. So going on 4 years now. Yeah. So right before the pandemic, we bought a piece of property in South Austin and 2 acres. And in the back, there's this beautiful natural spring that comes up there. It's part of Slaughter Creek that turns into a lake. And so the back half of the property, I call it like the Louisiana jungle. It's got like the big saw palmettos and 2 little streams that go through it. And then the front half of the property is just like normal. It was completely overgrown. So I actually cut down over 90 trees that were invasive. We're going through the process of planting a food forest there for our own food production. And for those who don't know, food forest is anything that's native that grows really well. And what you do is you plant a tree. So let's just say we plant a persimmons tree, and then around that we plant berry bushes, and around that you plant like little garlic scapes and things like that. Everything is meant to regrow itself and feed itself. So you're not like tending soil. It's the low, easy, lazy farmer way of doing things, right? You're not tilling ground or anything. We do have a little I built a fenced off garden for us where we grow some peppers and some herbs. The big thing is herbs. We put our own herbs on our own food, and that is the one thing that we did that I forgot to say in the modified carnivore is we add our own herbs, fresh and dehydrated, to all of our food because I figured I'm okay. I know there's no chemicals on it or anything like that. I'll give myself permission to throw my own, parsley and that kind of stuff. Sage. So we grow sage, oregano, chives, parsley, cilantro, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Lots of education in that process too.
Yeah, we garden. We do all that. We're in the process. I'm building a podcast studio in my backyard. Eventually, the end of the summer goal is to build a big chicken coop back there. We compost everything, so that's really fun. I prefer to call it soil making. So there's an actual end result of like all the food scraps that we have go into this soil making bin. And the kids really understand that. And it's like this now goes into growing our herbs, which then we eat. And they see that whole cycle of life. So yeah, that's why it's called a hobby farm. We're not like, there's no cows or anything of that nature.
There's no cows.
No, my wife always teases me that she's going to get a goat one day. And I'm adamantly against it. But so it's a real low maintenance. It's meant for me because I know that I really do well in nature, and that when I'm stressed, if I go out and I chop wood or if I put my hands in the soil, like that is the number one way for me to decompress. And I didn't have that in my life previous, and that's one of the reasons why I burned out so bad is like I was in the inner city, I couldn't have fires, I couldn't be outside barbecuing the way that I wanted to, and all of those sorts of things. So when I say we designed our life with intent and purpose, we really designed our life with an intent and purpose. So I've studied permaculture, I've studied food forests, I've studied hobby farms, all to make this a reality of part of my integrated life, that every single day I get out into nature and I touch nature.
Yeah. No, I suppose when we talked about in that first episode, your bus trip, when you guys were all working on like organic farms and stuff along the way.
That was part of the whole intent of it. Yeah, we did a year of traveling the country to all the different farms to learn all the different various types of permaculture to see what works best for different areas and what are the positives and negatives. And we really learned very quickly, like, nope, we don't want the rabbit farm. Nope, we don't want the goat farm. Nope, we don't want the whatever the case may be. Because we saw firsthand, like, that was not for us. Yeah,
it's just way more labor intensive to have the goats and all that.
Dirty, smelly, labor intensive. Like, we want the lazy farm. Like, we love our vacations. We love going and doing stuff. I run a business that, requires me to leave. And as it grows, I'll be more and more gone. So it's it's with the intent of long term of having this sanctuary, but it's a low maintenance sanctuary.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that's probably the biggest holdup for me is like there's a lot of stuff I'd like to do from like a backyard farm type thing, but it's like, yeah, you have to be around for that.
Yeah. It's always, and it's a funny joke. There's a meme that goes around because we look at all, like one of our favorite things on Instagram is to look at all the homesteaders, right?
Okay,
like,
yeah.
And it's the meme is, I'm super stressed about X, Y, and Z. I think I should start, doing sourdough and, like it lists off 10 more things that the person should start because they're stressed.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's totally our life as we go from making our own kombucha to making our own sourdough. We make our own like essential oils. Like we do all these creative things as part of our fun of things that we're doing, but it can be stressful. And we go in these little periods of, we're doing a ton and then we don't do any and then we're doing a ton and we make all of our own stuff and then we don't make any of our own stuff. And
yeah, I think it's probably good to be able to turn it on and off when you can, so you have that flexibility to do some of that. Well, eventually you got to go to Japan, right? So
exactly. Yeah, we've got Japan on the list. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that we want to do.
Awesome. I want to dive into the strength training component too, and then maybe parlay that into talking about the DEXA scan a little bit, because I find like that to be an interesting input for a variety of reasons. Just purely from the coaching lens, I think strength work is a valuable add-on for people who are participating in endurance sport or have a goal in endurance sport. It has got the added benefit of when you're actively trying to lose weight, kind of making that skew more towards losing non-lean tissue versus losing non-lean tissue as well as lean tissue, which I think you can see when you look at these big weight loss like situations. It's like a lot of times when there's no strength input going into it,
you lose a lot of lean mass. Yeah, and to me, like the overall conversation, I've come into a new age. So a little bit of my background, like I said, I've been in this business for 30 years. And when I ran my office, I was very much a person that was much more into like rehab and things of that nature. Now that I know that the science is very clear about longevity and overall health, that muscle mass is the number, one of the top indicators of like overall health, I'm in a much different perspective of time allocated towards rehab and being functional versus just pure muscle strength. And I'm much more in this leaning into category of grow some darn muscle. And when you lose weight, try not to lose all that lean muscle mass, because it's trying to get that back, even if I were to lose another 30, 40 pounds and it would be all of it, and I wasn't doing strength training, then I would have like a 2-year outlook of strength training afterwards to try to regain that muscle mass to be healthy. Whereas if I incorporate the strength training now, it's just easy. Like I'm gaining, like a couple of periods where I dipped down on the DEXA scan where I did lose some lean muscle mass, of course. But for the most part, I've been fluctuating, and I'll gain, like this past month, I gained 2 pounds of muscle. And it's because I'm doing more of at my dysfunctional state. In my old office, I would have started me doing a rehab program. Now that I'm a little bit older and wiser, I actually started a traditional bodybuilding program with this, because I knew that the faster that I could build muscle, the better my functional capacity would be irregardless. And if I do it right, where I warm up properly and all those sorts of things, it takes care of most of my dysfunction while I'm doing it. So I purposely chose 3 days a week of hitting every single muscle group all 3 days, of heavy squats, heavy benches, heavy curls, all the traditional basic powerlifting type of stuff, bodybuilding type of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're doing like a warm up that sort of doubles as like a mobility routine.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm very functional when I warm up. So it's like a lot of trunk rotations and deep squats and ass to grass and trying to get your knees to crack and get that ankle mobility. And I've just done so much rehab over the course of my career that I have it really down to, in under 5 minutes, you can work every single joint in the body from a rehab standpoint, and then actually get to the deeper lifting. Whereas some programs, you'll do, a medicine ball twist, and you're spending 10 minutes doing rehab exercises kind of thing, purposely choosing not to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really interesting topic. And I suppose it's probably a strength for you, given your background in chiropractics. It's like you have an eye for that, where You probably are noticing things where a lot of runners, maybe something starts bothering them, and it's like,
ignore
I can push through this.
Yep.
And I was talking to a couple coaching clients this last week who had like a small little injury that more or less like resolved itself after a few days. And I told them afterwards, the lesson here is you alerted me the day you started noticing it versus doing kind of the sometimes more traditional running move of, I can still run, therefore I will. Yep. And then it's not that. It's banging on that dysfunction for weeks and weeks and weeks that typically leads to the long-term overuse injuries.
That's where I used to make my money.
Yeah, that's right.
All you silly runners out there ignoring your pains.
Yeah, we get too type A about it. And it's like, I can't miss that 60-minute run. I'm going to do it anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, for me, it's because I am intuitive. I feel when things aren't working right. So like I've torn my right knee meniscus twice. Mm-hmm. In the past 2 weeks, I can feel that it's like the scar tissue is stuck in there a little bit. Mm-hmm. So like I immediately stop and I go and I crack it and I open it up and I do like 2 seconds of rehab and then I get back to running. Mm-hmm. So I don't ignore things. I embrace it and I attack it with a ferocity. I don't even know how to say that word anymore. Yeah, something of that nature. You get it.
Yeah.
Where I'm really diving into it of right away, like I'm not letting anything build. And so therefore for me, like I'm not doing the overall rehab exercises like I used to prescribe in my office because I'm cutting things off at the pass and I'm not letting them get bad at all.
Yeah. Even
though I have tons of dysfunction, all the new updates I forgot to tell you. So I got x-rays of everything. Turns out I have 3 compression fractures in my neck, which is why my arm was going numb.
Oh, wow.
3 of my vertebrae collapsed onto each other and closed the gap off. My low back has Bastrup's kissing spine disease, which is where the back ends impact each other and then they create a ball of inflammation. And I have so much arthritis down there that the left side has completely grown closed. And I was born with a facet joint that was at a wrong angle. And that's why my back would just keep sliding out because there'd be no stopping the sliding from happening. So that's current. And then 2 hip impingements. It looks like fingers growing down through my hip sockets. There's so much arthritic hooks growing down through my sockets. So yeah, those are the fun updates that I found and going through this process of just collecting more data about myself that I didn't know that I had. So these are all the things that I'm dealing with on a daily basis, but I've dealt with them for so long that it's preemptive rehab is way more important than letting it get bad rehab.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point. I know like when I had my sacral stress fracture, I sort of like took a deeper look at everything during that process and sort of learned some habits that I think were important, which was like when I was younger, it was like, here's some daily exercises you could do that amount to like 3 minutes. And I was like, what is that going to do?
Yeah.
Like, that's not going to do anything.
Yep.
It's like the one session might not do anything, but the fact that you're doing it every way and you're keeping those pathways and those ranges of motion open and not forgotten by your body. Yep. And the best way I find to describe this is like, if you look at just the number of positions you'd put your body into if you had to sit on the floor versus a chair all day.
Yes.
It's like hundreds versus like a few.
Yep.
And it's not that the few you're engaging in the chair are bad. It's just when you do only them, you lose the ability to kind of move in those other planes.
And people develop the habits around it. This is a big thing that I used to dive into with people in my office is I would just watch them sit down and I would watch them walk up and down stairs. And statistically, like 95% of us only do 1 or 2 things. And so like we always cross our leg the same way. We always use the one dominant foot to go up the stairs and we leave the other one behind. And so like it's real easy to see like, are you a glute activator? Or are you a quad activator? Like all of those things in itself are not bad. But when you do them for 30 years in a row and don't do anything else, they become very detrimental.
Yeah, and then when you find yourself in that situation where you're engaging one leg versus the other, their imbalances begin to occur.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's very obvious once you become aware of it, of like how people sit and how they do. But then you can directly see it. Like if you go to stretch that person as an example, and they always cross their right leg over the top of their left leg. Well, of course, yeah. When you go to stretch their hip sockets, one is going to move really well and one's going to move really crappy. But then you amplify that when you're running for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. Suddenly you get like an inch difference in your stride from one side to the other. And then that just works its way up the spine. It works your way up to core activation, and all those problems start to persist out of it.
And that's how you end up with a sacral stress fracture.
And that's how you end up with a sacral stress fracture. It absolutely is. Yeah.
It is. It's interesting. It's interesting stuff. And yeah, it's never, I think what you told me, when we were talking last was I think I was just talking to you about the sacral stress fracture and kind of what I learned. I was like, one of the things that maybe was partly responsible for it was I have a torn right hip labrum.
Yeah.
And it's like, I probably have learned to kind of operate with that in a way that is potentially problematic for my right sacral area.
And we talked about your toes
right.
and feet.
And that's what you told me. You're like, well, yeah, you said you should take it another layer deep and say like, well, why did the hip labrum issue was probably originally a foot and ankle issue. So it's like, yeah, it's funny, like you can always go further back and find something probably at the point of impact, which is going to be the feet.
When people, by the time they're 15 to 20 years old, the big toe starts to get tight. And because modern day shoes squeeze in, we're supposed to be out like a duck's feet.
Yeah.
We're supposed to have webbed feet. When we look at tribes across the world that have never worn shoes, they're anywhere from 20 to 40% wider than a shoe culture.
Yeah.
And so like it's very common by the time you're 15, 20 years old, that big toe starts to freeze up. And then that changes the way that you roll off of your foot, which doesn't matter at that time. But by the time you hit 40, your knee actually can't rotate the way that it's supposed to. And why do we have the highest rate of knee meniscus surgeries, 400,000 knee meniscus surgeries every year in America? Well, we wear these damn shoes and our big toes get stuck. And then over 20 years of walking funny on these big shoes, like our knees don't rotate the way that they're supposed to. So yeah, they just grind out that cartilage and tear it open. Yeah. And so it's actually common sense, but it's way too simple and way too common that people don't even realize it or talk about it. It's like none of the doctors that you go to, it's like, they're going to just fix your knee, right? They're just going to go in there and scope it out and clean it out. They don't talk to you about like, your toe's stuck and you need to just get that loose and then that knee will feel better.
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually an interesting kind of point too, because I was talking to some of the like development team at Ultra Footwear, because they've been around now for, I think 2010 was when they officially kind of were a brand that was selling. So, they've been around now for 13, 14 years. Yeah. It's like they started around like year 5, 6. Some of the kind of the early adopters to their stuff were starting to request more foot shape, or I guess models that have a more aggressive foot shape. So like wides within a foot shape, because they had started out and the original model was fine, but now their toe splays actually increased, like you said, and they just were wanting even more room yet. And I
was a big fan of their progression back then, because I used to have all the shoes hanging on my wall. So I used to do shoe clinics in my office back then. And they were one of the brands that I would always try to like get people into because they did have that wider toe box. And
the funny thing is, as they've grown too, they've just reached a wider market where like early on it was basically people who wanted like pretty aggressive foot shapes. The way I describe it is a foot shape's a foot shape, no matter whether you have a low volume foot or a high volume foot, somewhere in between. But the volume of your foot will maybe dictate how either the rest of the shoe is designed or how much you actually like build out that foot shape design. So they got to a point where in the early days, there would be people who were like, I really like the idea of this, but I have a super low volume foot. And they were kind of in the early stages. So they needed something that was a little more foot shape with lower volume in it. So then they start adding those options, and it's like, okay, now that customer's happy, they have an option. The traditional one's like, why'd you make that shoe? That thing sucks.
The mass market problem.
It's like it's whack-a-mole to some degree. And eventually, like you get around to just kind of saying like, look, we have a big enough customer base now where our catalog is trying to capture everyone along their stage of natural footwear. And like you may be at an end stage and you want our torn wide, where it's foot shaped plus wide, versus someone who's new, already has a low volume foot. They may be better off in the Riviera or something a little lower volume. So it is funny when you see that, though, because everyone's kind of thinking about, this catalog is my catalog. It needs to have a shoe option for me. I've across the whole thing. But yeah, no, it's I had Brian Beckstead on the podcast, who's one of the original founders of Ultra Footwear.
I saw that one.
Yeah, he's fun to talk to because he's got the full scope of everything. He's heard it all.
It is fascinating. Like there's unfortunately a big mismatch between science and commercial. And so what I mean by that is, even, this is very prominent in healthcare, but even when it comes to shoes, like, we knew early on, Nike has been even reported of this, so all the way back in the 70s, that when they tried to make shoes that looked like real feet, people didn't buy them because they thought it looked
aesthetics,
weird. Yeah, and it's, so there's this mismatch between what people buy versus what we know is good for us. And unfortunately, there always has to be this balance played, that as a company grows, they always start with a great mission, whether it be a food company, a shoe company, whatever the case may be, but they start hitting the mass market, and they can only get so far, but their investors require them to keep growing. And so they got to give in to, the thing that makes the most sales. And so it's always this fascinating conversation of, of how do you grow a company and still stay within your scope of, I want to fix X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, it's definitely a moving target to a large degree. I find the interesting with running too, and you won't have to worry about this with your goal with a Javelina 100 because you're kind of safe from it on the trails and things like that at this point. But one of the biggest shifts I've seen is the super shoe. I'm sure you've probably at least familiar of the path of this, where historically on race day, like the lower profile, lighter, firmer shoe you could get away with, keyword get away with, was the better option. So like if you could get down to something that was like a couple ounces or a few ounces, super responsive, super firm, great, you're probably going to get better performance out of that shoe. But if you're doing something like a marathon or an ultra marathon, you have to be able to tolerate that loading of that type of footwear. So you have to work at it. You have to really build up that lower leg strength and that durability. Whereas now with the super shoes, essentially, I mean, there's some synergy between like the carbon plates and the foam, but really the foam is the big mover here, where now you have something where essentially the more foam you add, the more efficient the shoe gets. To the degree where they've had to put regulations down as how high you could stack a shoe. Because
it's going to get crazy.
They put a limit on it. It's 40 millimeters on the road and 25 millimeters on the track. So they've sort of capped the development of that. But when you think of, did you follow at all when Kipchoge did the sub 2 hour like exhibition race? It wasn't an actual event. They like built it out to be as fast as possible. They gave him like windshields, pacers.
No, I didn't.
Okay, yeah. So sub 2 hours hasn't been done in an actual event, but it has been done in an exhibition. And he did it in an exhibition, and the shoe he wore for that was actually, I think, 52 millimeters, if I remember right.
Oh, wow.
So that one wasn't able to be sold to, I mean, you can still make a shoe that goes outside those regulations.
That's
you just can't take it to a competition and expect to come away with an award, I guess is the way to explain it.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So to get back to what I was talking about before, the market shifted from like brands almost always had some version of a low profile shoe on their catalog because they could justify it as a racing flat.
Right.
And then like when the minimalists and the people who are more in line with that sort of a product, they could always kind of lean on a brand having a racing flat of some sorts to kind of get that experience. Or a brand could say like, okay, we have these couple pairs of shoes that kind of fit both those parts of the market. Whereas now they've sort of eliminated the one where like people are going to use that on race day for the most part, because most people are going to wear a super shoe on race day. But we're also seeing growth have you seen this? There's been a good growth in the minimalist footwear market, but I think if I remember right, it's less runners and more just fitness people. So like the original Boost, it was like you had the Vibram 5 Fingers, the minimalist, like the New Balance Minimus and all that stuff. There was kind of a running movement, Born to Run, all that stuff. So the big market there was the runners. And then, I mean, it's like anything, no one has the patience to actually put that process into place. So they go from their big built-up support shoe.
How to get down to Vibram 5 Fingers.
It could be like a 6 or 12 month process. And even then, you're probably not running in the 5 Fingers all the time either.
Right.
So it's like, it is one of those things where, if you throw out your support shoes and go right into the 5 Fingers and just resume,
it's the classic argument of fixing yourself versus sports performance.
Right.
It's like if you want to fix yourself, you go to a minimalist shoe. If you want sports performance, you do whatever application you need for whatever you're doing. But
yeah. And an interesting way that I think this is probably what people who are really thinking about what you just said will end up doing is they will use the super shoe for the race because they're going to want that couple extra percentage of efficiency. Yep. Well, they'll need it if they're a professional.
If they were smart, they would train without
exactly.
it.
Yeah. Yeah. So you won't have a situation where I think there's a little nuance there, I would say, because like to some degree you get like a little bit of almost like an Alter G treadmill effect with the shoes where it kind of protects you. So like let's say you're a marathoner and you're historically hitting 120 miles per week in a normal pair of shoes before things start getting a little wobbly. Now maybe you can do 130, 135, 140 with a super shoe all the time. But
and you're not extending your tendon very long.
Right.
That's where all the tendon injuries come from.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's that balance there between can I still increase my training load or my reps more or less, but maintain the lower leg strength and integrity.
Yep.
And there's a balance there. So it's like, how do you kind of figure out where that is? And it's going to probably be different one person than another. So it's just adds another layer of complexity to performance, which is just the way that works.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a fun, we always have to bring perspective. And that's what people forget, especially in the influencer world. We forget to bring perspective. And so we talk about, oh, this is the best shoe or, oh, this is the best tactic. And it's like, no, we got to bring perspective to the other user, the person that's doing this of, do they have a long tendon? I used to treat a lot of patients that, especially female clientele, have to wear high heels during their job or chose to wear high heels. I don't think anyone has to, but they choose to wear high heels and they shorten that tendon and then they go out and they try to do their marathon training and they constantly would get, shin splints, tendinopathies, Achilles bursitis, all of those things because their tendon was so short. Like, we need to have that perspective before we start recommending shoes for people of like where they're at, where they're going, what are they doing? And you just always have to ask yourself that question.
Yeah. This is off topic, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Since I got you, let's lean into some of your background maybe. With hamstring tendinopathy, did you see that a lot when you
were?
Okay.
Yeah. I was the weird guy that everyone referred that type of stuff in all of Madison.
Okay.
Because I was the one person who did everything. So I did rehab, manual therapy, deep tissue, gua sha, Graston, K-taping, sports performance. I did the full scope in my office.
Okay. Maybe we should I'm going to ask this question anyway, but like we should do an episode where we just dive into some of these common running injuries and like the origin of why they usually occur and just unpack a lot of that stuff. Because I have been getting listeners asking more about, hey, can you do a deep dive into like
That'd
some of that
super
stuff?
Fun.
I think it would be awesome. So,
because the way that I like to approach that is there's common practices of treating the thing, and then there's always the much better discussion of why does this happen? Like we were talking about your toes with your sacral impact. Like there's always more to the story than the quick solution. And in a podcast format like this, I mean, we could probably do a whole podcast on just one injury.
Yeah, we could do hamstring tendinopathy.
Yeah, exactly.
Do a series where we do each one.
Because not only is there the why is it happening, but there's also the full spectrum of treatments of how are you supporting nutritionally, regenerative medicine versus biologics versus communication in your thing versus manual therapies versus chiropractic physical therapy. Like there's all these tools that are available to us that are easily accessible now. And so how do you go about programming your recovery as an intelligent person who wants to perform well? How much money do you have? How much time do you have? And so there's that side of the equation that I love talking about as well. Is how do you blend all of that together?
Yeah, because there's always going to be a case where it's different. So,
right. And hamstring tendinopathy, to be quite honest, like maybe a third topic is misdiagnosis. So I just had this conversation today because my daughter is getting shin splints. She is as part of the root. She is a toe walker, so she is just always up, and I had to explain to her and her coach, and I'm actually going to be doing a shin splint clinic. There's actually no such thing as shin splints. That's actually just a make-believe word that just means lower leg pain.
It's an umbrella term.
It's an umbrella term that we all try to use, and so we get massively confused, but your doctor has no idea. Your doctor has never, ever been trained on shin splints. Even if you go to that sports medicine orthopedic doctor, they've never been trained on shin splints. and what the different osis versus itis is. Is it a degrading tendon or is it an inflamed tendon? Is it, all of these sorts of mechanical things that make a massive difference on how you're supposed to treat them. And so like the misdiagnosis happens all the time of, tendinopathy in your hamstring. Is it a tendinosis? Is it a tendinitis? Is it actually your meniscus that's just referring pain to the hamstring insertion? Like, there's all these things that it can actually be driving from of hamstring pain. It can be coming from your back.
Yeah.
It can be coming from, you may have a vertebrae that's shifted too forward and irritating the nervous system. Like, so it's a fun conversation, deep rabbit hole.
Yeah. It was kind of front and center of my mind because I had a guest on not too long ago who he had really bad hamstring tendinopathy for a couple of years, actually, I think.
Yeah.
And he tried all sorts of stuff and it wouldn't go away. And it was kind of that, to the degree where like he'd sit there for an hour and he could feel it if he sat there because it was in a rough spot and he couldn't get anything to move it until he got a running form assessment. And they worked on some things on his running form and essentially like fixed whatever it was that was engaging that area in a way that was I guess probably overworking it. So he gave it a little relief. Now the same activity.
Typically, so the hamstring, pelvis, and low back are a threeplex that have to work together. And if your low back and pelvis don't move properly and you don't know how to activate your core properly while you're running, your hamstring has to try to pull too hard. And so it can continually grind away. And that turns into an osis situation where it starts as a tendinitis, which is just inflammation. Over time, because he's had it for several years, that itis actually turns into an osis where the inflammation actually eats away like little gravel road into the tendon.
Okay.
And then you've got little pockets in the tendon. And that's why it creates a chronic pain situation is you're constantly overloading those areas because you don't know how to activate your core while you're running. And so, it's fascinating that it's always about the root problem and then how do you treat it? And
So in that situation, it would be practicing how to activate your core in order to get away with it.
And also, how do you teach that person to activate their core? Because there's a couple of different ways. It all depends on your body. So like some people just simply putting the tongue to the roof of their mouth, they'll activate their core and it'll take care of their hamstring problem.
Interesting.
Some people, it's just telling them to gently squeeze their shoulder blades down and back while they're running because they get this posture forward.
Sitting at computers.
Exactly. And then that deactivates the core. And so you actually, you're leaning forward in that good leaning form, but because your posture is rolled forward, you're amplifying the weight forward and that hamstring has to work harder to pull. So if you just get them to like open up and you do this perfectly, you're a great example of keeping your arms open and running like this. This is one of the reasons why you can run so fast. I used to teach people like you're pulling a ski rope. And so you get the little lightly touch your fingertips to your thumb and you're pulling like this and you squeeze down and back with your shoulder blades and you immediately see their stride length improve. It's a really crazy thing.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I think you actually probably answered my question better than I anticipated based on what I was thinking. My original question actually was like my understanding with, I guess this is maybe too basic. You can tell me if I'm thinking about this wrong. My understanding with like hamstring tendinopathy is like stretching can actually make it worse. Whereas strengthening is usually the first kind of mode that they'll try for something like that. Is there a reason why that would work that way?
The cause of the injury was overstretching to begin with.
Okay.
Yeah. So just just in a general rule of thumb. So if you have like Achilles bursitis, which is an inflammation between your heel bone and where your Achilles attaches, that's usually because it's getting overstretched. And so like you're going too minimalist, too quick kind of thing, right? So you're not going to stretch that to fix it. You're going to strengthen it to fix it. So same thing with the hamstring. A lot of times if the hamstring is an overuse chronic issue, most of the time it's because it's getting overstretched to begin with. And so therefore you can start, if the pain is really bad, you start with isometric loading, which is great for tendon strength. So tendons are very much an isometric or eccentric loading type of mechanism. And so we can design isometric exercises. We can design eccentric, not concentric as the contracting. So like the easy one to understand is your calf. I would stand 2 feet on a step I'd use, say my right leg is the problem. I would lift my body with my left leg and then hold my heel up with my right leg and then try to let it down as slowly as possible. That's an eccentric. Isometric is just you put your heel flat both and you're hanging it in the air off of the step. And then you lift your left leg up and you try not to let your heel move. So that's an isometric
You're just holding
move.
That pose.
Yeah. And both of those are what are tendons. If it's an actual tendon problem, that's where it strengthens the tendon loading capacity of that.
Yeah.
Not to mention, like, there's manual therapies that you can use in conjunction with that, neurostimulation, acupuncture, like different things that way that can help stimulate that process.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. So for like hamstring tendinopathy, would like a static like glute bridge be something that people would want to use? Or
Yeah, glute bridges is great because a lot of times the glutes aren't activating, and that's why the hamstring has to overactivate.
Yeah.
So that's your strengthening the solution. The hamstring component of it, this is where it's getting into like modified deadlifting.
Sure.
Like I'm a huge fan of deadlifting for hamstring issues, but you just can't do it deep. You can't do it like a gym rat. You gotta do it more from a rehab standpoint. So there's like specific instructions based off of the shape of that person's body, of starting with like a kettlebell, and the kettlebell is on like yoga blocks, maybe 3 or 4 yoga blocks, and they're only going like 2 inches. Kind of thing. Yeah.
That's interesting. Do you like hex bar deadlifts for runners versus like traditional deadlifting?
It really is just depending on the programming that you're doing. I'm a big fan. The way that I like to describe things is that there isn't a right or wrong. There's only an application. And so it comes down to what is your goal and what are you trying to do. And so there's no wrong form, whether you're sumo, wide grip, in grip, there's 20 different types of squats you can do.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't matter. It's all application of what type of muscle you're moving. So in general, you can take something like, in general, let's say hamstring, which side of the hamstring, right? There's 2 tendons and they're actually 2 different muscles. So there is no such thing as just a general hamstring.
Right. Yeah.
So like you can do a wider foot stance deadlift for the inner one, and you can do an inner foot stance for the outer hamstring, right? So it's like all those minor variations are going to be the application that we're actually trying to fix.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. I was thinking I was like actually looking at it more from the lens of just like the advanced degree of experience that would be required maybe for like a deadlift versus a hex. Progressing
into things based off of your functional capacity is a must. That's the science. That's why people like you exist. That's why we should always hire a coach in all these different arenas, is because they have the wisdom to start to know that, and if they don't, fire them and get to the next person. But that's why you want to work with people, is because every body's shape is different, right? My wife and I are the same height, but her legs are like a full 3 inches longer than mine. My torso is much longer. So we have very different functional capacities of how we deadlift. And so you have to take all of those into consideration when you are doing it. But in general, if you progress towards heavier and heavier in more and more varieties, think of everything as a 3-month progression. So whether it be traditional deadlifting, hex deadlifting, sumo deadlifting, you can do 3-month segments of all 3 of those and gain massively different benefits from all of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. Awesome. I can't remember why we got on that topic, but we went there.
Well, we were talking about, way back, I was talking about all my x-ray findings.
Let's go back to that.
Maybe a half an hour ago.
Let's go back to your x-rays. I think we can just talk about some of the measurement stuff in general. So you were getting x-rays, blood work, the DEXA scan stuff.
And my Garmin stuff.
And the Garmin stuff, yeah. So I guess if we put like, the Garmin stuff is probably like more like sleep and recovery based metrics. The x-rays are more like, okay, this is mapping of my body and maybe what I need to work with or work around.
Yeah.
And then like the DEXA is obviously like, all right, you're on this weight loss journey, but you want to maintain lean muscle mass. And that's going to kind of give you the glimpse into how that's progressing.
Yep. Yeah. So basically I look at data as, there's things that we can do and things that are just good to know. Like, there's technically no point in going and getting an x-ray most of the time. It's kind of funny coming from a sports medicine dude, right? Is like a vast majority of cases, even if you have a broken bone, like I have these compression fractures in my neck, it doesn't change my outcome. The reason why I got them is because I'm documenting all of this stuff along the way, is there's technically no point for me to get an x-ray of my neck, even though my arm was getting numb, because I know scientifically and through all of the different probabilities that I wasn't dealing with cancer. I wasn't dealing with all these sorts of things. I didn't have the symptoms of any of that type of stuff. So therefore, my outcome of what I was going to be doing about it didn't change anyways. It's just information.
Yeah.
And a lot of people just like information. So that's where x-rays come in. And I struggled with this throughout my career on should I send people for x-rays or not. Most of the time, and this is probably the case of a lot of viewers, they just like to know, even though it's a pointless image and you're getting x-rays shot through your body, and that can be detrimental as well. Like MRIs, all of that stuff, we know that if you MRI, 70% of the population is going to have a disc herniation. So that orthopedic surgeon that is sitting in front of you and you have neck pain and they go, oh, look at this disc herniation. Chances are you've had that there for probably 20 years and you're just now getting symptoms. And it's actually a pointless correlation to the symptoms that you're actually feeling. But because the system is designed the way that it is, it's the only, that orthopedic surgeon is the only thing that he can hang their hat on to say, oh yeah, let's do this. And so it's, anyways, I could get into a crazy digression about that, but I did it for the sake of documenting my journey and talking with people that we have a lot of dysfunctions. We all have dysfunctions. We all have pain. We all have problems, but we all can do something about them. And it all starts with those simple habit changes. And that's the hope that I want to pass on to people, is that it does start with just tying your shoes and getting out there for 5 to 10 minutes. Even though we know the science is saying that you should be out there for 45 minutes, if you get out there for 5 minutes, you're winning. If you get to the gym and you only decide to do one exercise, and I had this happen a couple of times where I was just dead tired. I got to the gym, I went and did one exercise, and I felt good about it, and I went home because I knew I didn't want to push myself too hard, but I instilled that habit to get there. That is the most important thing. And then those little things, I describe this as the little staircase to health. You build 1 or 2 staircases at a time, and you keep working on those little 2 staircases. And then you'll build another 2 or 3 staircases. And over the course of 3 months, over the course of 6 months, 9 months, you get to the point where you're finally finding yourself having energy and health, and you actually want to do more. Yeah. Because before that, your brain does not want to change. Your brain will tell you every excuse not to change.
Yeah. It will. Yeah, it gets, and then you get into the routine and you get a program from your coach that deviates from that, and now your brain's doing the opposite thing. It's like, why did?
Yep. It's super funny. Yeah, but that's why I'm like dating up, getting all my data, leveling up that way, and so that I can share with the world that hey, you, Mr. Smith, you may be having these severe problems. I get it. I feel you. I've experienced that. But there's hope for you if you just start small. Yeah, exactly. The process is the same, irregardless of your starting point.
Yeah, that's interesting. So have you done anything with the other data points that have caused you to kind of alter anything? So like when you got the DEXA scan, did you notice anything where it was like, oh, well, maybe I'll change this strength thing around at all? It's all just been working out as intended so far?
Because I know that the habits are the most important thing. And so like for me, the data is just a confirmation of going in the right direction or the wrong
so for the DEXA scan too. Okay, gotcha.
And most of this stuff, like this is, I'm a big proponent of this, is looking at individual data points can be very detrimental to your progression. Looking at trend lines is where the magic is. Yeah. And so we have to collect enough data, and that's why I'm doing the blood work every month, is that when you go once every 2 years to get your cholesterol, like you literally could, it's a snapshot that could be totally inaccurate. And we know that at least 40 to 50% of people who are on blood pressure medication shouldn't be on blood pressure medication simply because when they went to the doctor, they were stressed that week or something of that nature. Because they go so infrequently. Yeah. And then the doctor sees that one measurement, and then they get prescribed something in this category, and then they don't follow up with their doctor for 3 years. Well, you need data points, especially when it's metrics like blood pressure, sleep, our consistency of our body fat. Like even the DEXA scan, which is considered the gold standard of body composition analysis, we have to remember that all of them have a plus or minus percentage associated with them. And so like when you go and get that scan and you get that result, it may be plus or minus 1% of something. And so we can get this drastically wrong idea if we only take one or two data points. We need multiple of them to show the trend line.
Yeah.
And then that's where you can make educated decisions on, am I in the right direction or not?
Yeah. Yeah, for the DEXA scans I've done, I started just scheduling at the same time of day, and then I try to replicate like what I did like the 24 hours prior as close as possible, just to try to eliminate the margins as much.
Because water weight and all that stuff affects that. Yeah,
I could go in there after a 20-mile run totally dehydrated versus a rest day fully hydrated and get totally different reading, even though my body comp was probably the same in either of those situations.
Like after my 2-hour run, I lost 7 pounds on that run, right? Like just my body works in crazy ways that way. Yeah. And I could totally like make it look really good on the DEXA scan for that day after of, oh, look how much weight he lost.
Right. And that shows, and that would actually probably show an increase in body fat percentage, I would imagine too, if you had that much water loss.
Yeah, because of relative. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because that wouldn't be lean, or that would be lean mass loss.
The impedance would be messed up. Yeah, because that. Anyways.
But you'd be lighter.
But I would be lighter, exactly, and the internet would be happy.
Yeah. All right, cool. And I think that actually, I'll maybe end on this if we can, unless you have other things you want to chat about. You had questions. Did we get through any of your questions, or did we just?
No, I think I'm genuinely
We're hitting on them all.
Yeah, we hit on them all. Biggest thing that I need to go over with you is scheduling some fun events.
Yeah, that's right. We need to put
some 50K on, and
there's I just did a Substack post actually about training races, kind of the argument for and against them.
Okay.
And we talked about this last time, I think, in terms of the value of the training races is like there is a uniqueness to an event.
Yep.
I mean, you saw it all the time when you were working in chiropractic, watching the athletes. I'm sure they behave differently at events a lot of times, or maybe you saw them working on rituals that would normalize that situation as much as possible. Right. So it felt more like just a training day.
Any good athlete has a routine that they need to develop, so that, and this is the biggest thing, like you go to a race, and this is one of my big pet peeves is there's all these product companies at the race of gels and stuff that you've never tried before. Right. And the amount of people that have puked at a race because they tried some sort of new product for the first time after 6 months of training for it. You gotta, anyways.
But where was I going with that?
My race.
The race. I think putting some training races on the calendar is smart as long as you know how to behave around them. I mean, you have a timeline that in theory you wouldn't even have to behave yourself. You could actually give a full effort and we would have enough time to recover and not lose out. Well, it goes back to what we were talking about before. You're ahead of schedule. This is a value add you can include when you're ahead of schedule is I don't have to worry as much about the opportunity cost of a training race.
Cool.
So I send you out, let's say I send you out for a 50K, and because I send you out for a 50K, that costs us the majority of training
the following week,
or the week of, the week after. It could be like you have to start asking yourself, what inputs would we have done with 2 weeks that we're not doing now because of that 50K? And then does the value of the 50K outweigh that? Yeah. So the opportunity cost there is going to be different depending on where the person's at, what their timeline's like.
Now you're making me think.
Yeah.
I didn't think about it from that perspective. See, this is why you have to hire a coach.
Right. Well, and then the big mover there too is just keeping it sub-maximal. So if I had you go out and just say, if I said, all right, Dave, we're going to do a 50K, I want you to wring yourself dry. I want you to cross that finish line thinking like, there's no way I could have gone a second faster. That's a totally different opportunity cost than if I say, Dave, 80% full capacity at any given time. At any given time, you should always feel like I could go a little faster if I had to. I could go a little faster if I had to. You cross the finish line in that situation, the opportunity costs could be weeks different. So that's usually the big one for people where...
And I would have a hard time going at 80% during a competition.
Yeah, that's usually one question I'll ask coaching clients ahead of time. Like, are you the type of person who, when the gun goes off, you're all out? Like, if you're that person, we need to be a little more mindful.
Well, that's why I haven't been running with friends. I've been trying to be good and stay in my zone.
So for you, I would say like the nuance of the situation would be you could do a training race of a longer duration at full capacity, and it wouldn't be problematic with your timeline the way it
I
would
would
be.
still want to practice at 80% though, because to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but to get ready for the 100, if I do at an 80% on a 50K,
Closer to race pace.
yeah, that would be a race pace. I would want to try to practice race pace in a situation where I would be tempted to chase the rabbit. And to resist that rabbit would be like my biggest training goal of the race then.
And if
that's an interesting thought.
One way I'll do it with folks to kind of incentivize that is I'll just change the objective to the degree where they're like more incentivized to behave, which is just like, we want...
You're going to put a shock collar on me if I go over a certain pace that shocks me?
I would say, like, here's the thing. Like, if I have you go out and go all out for 50K, we can still learn stuff from that. It's still value in going through the process of what entails the days leading in and following a race. But what we don't necessarily learn there as well as like, what are all the inputs that are going to be valuable for you when you're going the intensity you will at Javelina. So if I have you going the intensity you'll do at Javelina for a 50K, we can learn things like fluid intake, like electrolyte intake, fueling, like stuff that's going to be more specific to the intensity that you're going to produce there versus something that
I'd
we're
totally
guessing
be
at.
down for that then. Yeah.
And then there's also other things too, and Austin's good with this. There's a lot of opportunities where, let's say you decided, I'm going to just do the Cap City 10K. It's like, we can take the Cap City 10K, turn it into a speed workout, and that's a lot easier to say like, all right, we would have done a threshold session today. We're going to lean into that, and the opportunity cost there is going to be less impeding on something where you're really long and it actually has like a pretty long recovery process to it.
Yeah, very cool. Oh, those are all very thought-provoking things.
They can be good progress monitoring points too. Let's say you did the Cap City 10K, and you wouldn't have to like wring yourself dry, but just give it a good hard push, and then have you do like after your speed work development phase, do another 10K. Same kind of situation where like give it a hard push, but don't feel like you have to destroy yourself. We can compare. We see like what did we actually achieve with that speed work development phase.
Yeah, we'll have some good conversations around that then.
Yeah, I think
we'll get that scheduled. The other thing then too, I would say is to me there's something primal, and maybe this will be for another conversation because this will probably bring up a whole nother topic, but there's something primal about being able to do this while eating. I make my own beef jerky.
Yeah.
Like, can I do this with just eating beef jerky and honey? Like, it's like, I don't know. There's something appealing about like that old primal, like hunter gatherer way of, they did it. Can I do it?
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of different input. And I would say like the longer the race gets, the more options that tend to be usable. Yeah. Because you just end up having like a more diverse set of needs in terms of what is going to work and be available to you. So like at Javelina, I mean, you could eat, if you ate just off the aid station, the range of things you would eat relative to what you would find on like a road marathon is insane. So
yeah, right. I've watched some of the videos of the stations. So interesting. Okay, that'll be for another time.
Cool. Yeah. Well, we got future topics. But yeah, this was fun. But before I let you go, Dave, share with the listeners where they can find you.
Oh yeah, thank you. Mindofdave.com. Just go to my website. And from there you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, is where I'm posting most of my content. But then you can also join my journey on my email list, where I'm sharing my modified carnivore strategies, just basic life hacks and how to program your life around health. And rehab stuff like we talked about. So yeah, they can sign up there. So mindofdave.com.
All right. And how to turn your backyard into a farm.
Yeah. Well, that's all part of it. So it's everything interesting to me. So if you resonated well with this podcast,
maybe we'll get some homesteaders following.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the sourdough, it's all the good stuff. Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thanks again, Dave, for coming on.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Hey everyone, if you are here, you have stuck around to hear more about how I use the products that sponsor the Human Performance Outliers podcast. I have taken a lot of time identifying these products and brands And I'm incredibly grateful that they are both products that I'm able to use sometimes on a daily basis, and they also are interested in supporting what I'm doing here at the Human Performance Outliers podcast and want to work with me. So here's how I use them. One of the reasons I came across S Fuels originally is it maps my protocol perfectly. So at S Fuels, they follow a principle of right fuel at the right time. This means that they don't demonize carbohydrate, but they understand the power of a low carbohydrate diet. So throughout my year, I have ranging inputs between fats and carbohydrates, but they're always based in a foundation of fats. S Fuel's approach matches that just right. It allows you to build a foundation in your nutrition with fats, but also gives you options to pull that powerful lever that is carbohydrate when you need it. So in their product line, this is how I use it. Race Plus, that's their carbohydrate source. I'll use this for faster workouts or for races when I'm trying to defend muscle and liver glycogen. Train is their fat-based powder, which is basically a sports drink powder, but with fat instead of carbohydrate. Helps improve fat oxidation rates. I love it for workouts where I need some calories. I don't want to run a huge deficit, but I don't want to introduce carbohydrates. Side note, this actually makes a great high-fat smoothie as well. So if you're interested in that, check out my Instagram reels. I've got some smoothies on there that I've used this for. Revival is a protein powder that I will use post-workout and post-race a lot of times. This is something I can easily mix into something like full-fat yogurt or in that high-fat smoothie that I mentioned. Using this just make sure I'm getting off on the right foot with the recovery process and maximizing my protein muscle synthesis. Next is Primed. Primed is my go-to caffeine source when working out. It gives you 80 milligrams of caffeine, but they make it in a way where it will help with focus, won't have jitters, and can help you with the fat oxidation benefits of caffeine consumption, as well as the reduction in perceived effort. Life Bars are my go-to snack. If I'm doing a pretty big training block and I need something between meals, Life Bars give me some healthy fats and protein that'll fit right into that. Finally, Keto 3. Keto 3 is a product that I'll use basically to replace anything I would have used granola for in the past. So I keep a bag of this around and I can sprinkle that on top of things that I would have previously put granola on when I want to keep the fats and the proteins high and the carbohydrates low. If you want to learn more about these products or check them out, head over to sfuelsgolonger.com where you can get 15% off your order. And this year, stay tuned because I'm going to be doing a series of free sample pack offers from those products that I just talked about. Last year, some of my trail running friends told me I needed to check out this brand named Janji. And when it came time to update my running apparel, I thought, okay, I'm going to check these guys out. I'm stoked that they want to work with me because I've ended up using this stuff for way more things than I actually thought I would. My main focus when I'm picking out workout gear, and specifically running gear, is how does it actually like sit on my body while I'm going through the different mechanics that are important to running or strength work and things like that. So the more a product can function the way it's supposed to, but stay out of the way, the better as far as I'm concerned. So their kind of lightweight, breathable, moisture wicking type of setup works really well for me. They're shorts. They're AFO middle short. I actually got 2 pairs of these, and I find myself using this for everything, basically. Like I've used them for short intervals. I've used them for long intervals, taken them out for long runs, easy runs. I even go to the gym with them. So I need both those pairs. I've been going through them. They have an odor-resistant tech to it, too, so I can usually get a few workouts out of them before I need to wash them. And I just find like my range of motion is great in it, regardless of whether I'm doing those short intervals, long run in the gym, doing mobility routine type stuff or like muscular endurance strength stuff and all sorts of different activities. So that short is going to be in my rotation even when the temperature picks up. I got a couple long sleeve options too from them. There's the Repeat Merino long sleeve and the Rover Merino hoodie. So the Repeat Merino I've been using as kind of like either a base layer if it's really cold out that I'll put on first and then something else over it, or if it's just kind of chilly where like a t-shirt or a singlet isn't quite enough and I may want it for part of the run but not all the run, or maybe I want it for the whole run but I don't want too much so I feel like I'm sweating profusely underneath that. This is perfect for that. So I'll use it over the singlet or just straight up first layer on and then something over top of it. The Rover Merino hoodie is one of the things that I'll use as kind of an outer layer. I'll put this over that merino long sleeve, and this one has a few extra features to it. It's a little thicker, so I can get away with it in a little cooler weather, but it also has like a hood that you can put up and then a face mask that covers part of your face that you can use too if it gets especially chilly out there. I've been using this both for the running workouts as well as taking it to the gym from a transportation standpoint as I'm getting there, and then during my warm-ups and things like that as something I can kind of count on. Both these items are super light and packable too, so if I do have a scenario where I think I might need it for part of the workout but not all of it, I don't hesitate to bring it because I know I can take it off and store it pretty easily if I need to without having to worry about feeling like I've got this like extra thing coming with me that is getting annoying. The next item I got from there was the tights. Now, tights are products that I am very skeptical about usually because I always end up having this situation occur where they either feel like too tight and restrictive or they feel like they're sagging on me. So I'm either feeling restricted by them, or if I don't feel restricted, I feel like I'm constantly trying to pull them back up or find a way to like fit them on me so they don't sag down. And it's just this constant battle where I just usually avoid wearing tights if I have to. These ones are much different than that. I'm loving these. I'm wearing these on all the cold weather days where I want that full protection layer, and they sit on me so perfectly. I can even stuff stuff in the side pockets. They've got these side pockets on either side. I put my phone in there. I've even taken my outer layer off and rolled it up and stuffed it in that side pocket. I don't feel like it's creating a situation where it's getting in the way or causing it to sag. Also, full range of motion. I've used this for faster runs and slower runs, and that's usually my test. If I can do a speed workout in the tights, then that's great because that means I'm moving through my gait cycle smoothly. And if they're not sagging on top of it, that's a bonus. I also picked up their Atlas multi-pant, which is a little bit more robust than the tights. So if you're looking for something for more of an outer layer, a little warmer, this would maybe be a little bit of an option. I've been using it on colder days for running and just as a way to wear something warm to get to the gym or during my warm-up during that. I love these because they taper down really nicely, so I'm not catching it on the side of my shoe as I'm going through my gait cycle or a movement in the gym. But they also have these really long zippers on the side, so if I do want to peel them off or put them on, I don't have to take my shoes off or feel like I'm fumbling around with it a lot. They also pack. They pack up real nicely too, so you can roll them up into the back pocket. And then if I do find that I'm taking them off partway through a workout, I don't feel like I have this like extra piece of gear that's like bogging me down much. If you're interested in checking out John G, you can get a 10% discount. Use promo code BITTER10, that's BITTER10, and go to johng.com. That's JANJI.com. And if you do like to shop at REI, they are also available there. Element Electrolytes has been my electrolyte of choice for quite some time now. They're actually back sponsoring the podcast for the third year. That's how long I've been using them. I actually got my sweat test done last summer where I found out that I lose 614 milligrams of electrolytes for every liter of fluid that I lose. And it's not uncommon that I'll lose a liter plus of fluid per hour, especially when it gets a little bit warmer. So I'm usually using electrolytes in my workouts, especially as they go beyond an hour or if the temperatures are a little bit warmer or if I'm just going through a lot of fluids for one reason or the other. My protocol right now is I'll do a half a pack of one of their chocolate flavors in my coffee in the morning before my morning training session. And then I'll do another half a pack to a full pack of usually watermelon in my fluids that I'm taking on during and after that workout. Their product specifically has 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium. So you can go a long way with one packet. Some of the other flavors they have available are citrus, watermelon, orange, grapefruit, raspberry, chocolate, mango chili, chocolate caramel. They actually right now just rolled out their seasonal options. One reason to keep an eye on Element is they will do seasonal releases where they have limited time offers. And right now their seasonal option is chocolate mint, chocolate chai, and chocolate raspberry. If you check them out and you like that sort of idea of mixing something with your tea or coffee or your hot chocolate, if you want to make yourself some hot chocolate with this, you can do that. Definitely check out the mint and the chocolate raspberry. I love both of those. if you do want to try them out, you can actually get a free sample pack right now with your first purchase. You just have to go to drinklmnt.com/HPO. Put in that /HPO, and that will offer up that free sample pack, as well as let them know that you're a supporter of the Human Performance Outliers podcast. Delta G ketones is a product I've been using for just over a year now. I started using them early last year as a test to see if it was something I was going to want to use in my training and racing. I wanted to stress test them in something longer, so I actually used them at the Rocky Raccoon 100 as my first kind of test of will these handle for the duration of a 100-miler versus just what I would notice in kind of day-to-day workouts and things like that. And they are something that I'm going to keep in my routine. So my basic go-to is the Delta G Performance. The reason I chose Delta G over all the other exogenous ketone supplements out there is they have a formula and a dosage that is supported by the research that we have to date. So they are the company that got the DARPA funding to design for special forces. They've been 50 plus published studies, 20 plus ongoing studies. My protocol with them is just to take a single bottle of that Delta G Performance before a key workout or before a race. And if I'm going to be doing a race that spans longer than 3 hours, I will take another bottle every 3 hours while I'm out there. So if you're interested in more details about exogenous ketones and Delta G specifically, I would encourage you to check out episode 351, Exogenous Ketones and Performance with Brian McMahon. You can also, right now on their website, they understand that this is something that is new for people, and they want to make sure that you are using it right and that you know what you're doing. So you can do a free consultation with them if you go to their website at deltagketones.com. If you do decide, hey, I want to check this stuff out and see what my experience is like, you can get 20% off and let them know you support HPO by using promo code BITTER20. That's BITTER20 for 20% off at deltagketones.com. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter.